Hello, YouTube. Today I'd like to talk about growing up fast as a child. Did you grow up fast as a child? And of recent, I've been asking myself that question, looking back on the way that I grew up. I grew up in a foster home, and I was later adopted. They got me at the age of 2, my family, and they adopted me around age 12 or 13 I was when they officially adopted me. Kids would come and go from the home. They would stay with us for a couple of days, weeks, and even sometimes years they would stay with us, and then they would go back to their family. I always stayed. I did have visitation with my biological mother and still know her to this day. My biological dad, I never knew. He was murdered when I was young, so I never knew him. My family were foster parents for about 13 years, and they fostered about 40 children throughout those years. And like I said, I was the only one that they adopted. My mother's health wasn't always the greatest. I don't even remember her working outside the home. I know she did at one time. But she was always a big lady, and she had severe rheumatoid arthritis. And she was a type 2 diabetic. So later on, she depended more and more on me. My sister, I do have a sister. She's actually my half-sister. And she's older than me, and she graduated high school and immediately moved out on her own. So she was independent, went straight to work after high school. So my sister was not adopted, but we were together growing up. But my mother's health declined, and I was put in a situation that my peers, at least from my knowledge, weren't put in. So I was doing things like before school, I would help my mother with her administering her medication. I would get her pill box and get the morning meds and bring her some water at the bed. And she would take her pills. Sometimes I would check her blood sugar and actually would prick her finger and take the strip, get the blood on the strip, put the strip through the glucometer machine to see what her blood sugar was. And I would actually administer her insulin shots. And I'd get the insulin, we kept it in the refrigerator, and I would do the whole thing and insert the needle in the bottle, withdraw the insulin, whatever the amount was, and I would administer it. Sometimes I would put it in her belly. Sometimes her belly would get sore from the needles. So sometimes I would put it on the meaty portion of her behind and put the needle in and pull it back a little bit to make sure I didn't have any blood, and insert the insulin. And then whatever else help that she needed. I was doing meal prep, getting meals ready. I would get meals ready, put it in a pan or a casserole dish that morning before school. And then it was ready to go, and then all my mom had to do was put it in the oven. I don't even remember my mother packing me a lunch for school. I always made my own breakfasts. As far, when I was old enough to do it myself. Of course, when I was little, she did, but But when I was old enough, I always remember making my breakfast every morning and packing my lunch. And I always found that interesting when I would go to school, having lunch with my classmates, and one of the kids would bring up something that the mom had put in the lunchbox, whether it was a note, or I remember one kid complained that his mom put something in his lunch. I think it was a bag of chips or something, a type of chips he didn't like. Why did my mom put this in here? Jim, do you want these? And would give them to me. Something like that. I do remember that stuff. And I always thought that was interesting that they had a parent that packed their lunch. And also, my classmates were doing what? They were involved in sports, band, other activities. And I remember asking my mom, could I go join the Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts? And she said to me, no, you're needed at home. And I inquired about sports one time, and she said, no, we're not going to pay for your medical bills. And so looking back on it, that might have saved my body, because I know a lot of guys who suffer from bad knees and back and injuries that they sustained playing football in high school. So I was spared from that. So at a young age, even though I had a good childhood when I was little and playing with the kids, and we did family things and picnics, and we would go to the local parks, and I remember barbecues and cookouts and trips to SeaWorld as a kid, and going on trips in the back of the station wagon and going. I do remember those things and have fond memories of that. But later, having to then switch roles, which I think was a little too soon, something that I was put in having to or take care of a parent and the responsibility of that. And my dad always instilled responsibility in me. He always had these lists on a lined notebook paper, and he had them on the kitchen countertop, and it had all my chores that he wanted me to do, whether it was pull beans in the garden, pull the weeds, empty the cat litter boxes, whatever he wanted done. I had that list of things that I was expected to get done. So I learned that stuff. And when I was growing up, going to school, I trained myself not to get too close to people, not to get too involved with things. Because what did I have programmed in my head? Jim, don't do that. You're needed at home. So that was my life. I went to school. While my other classmates were going over to their friend's house, hanging out after school at the going to the mall, or hanging out in these little hangouts, or going to their practices. They were doing all those things. I went straight home. I had chores to do. I had dinner to get ready in preparation for when Dad got home. And then whatever else my mom wanted done, because I was her hands and her feet to do those, since oftentimes she'd have these arthritic flare-ups and just wasn't mobile. Then later on, while I was in school, she was trying to get something out of the oven. I put something in the oven that morning, Later, she goes to get it out. She's pulling that out of she bends down, gets the casserole dish out of the oven, and she kept going backwards and she fell. And boom, she landed right on her behind, fracturing and crushing some of the discs in her back. That required surgery. And then it was downhill from there. So she was bedridden. We actually had to get a hospital bed in the house where she spent a lot of time. And the nurse, we had a home health nurse that came in for a while, and then she taught me how to change the dressings on that open wound on her back from the surgery. So I'm changing dressings. I'm helping with some bathing, dressing, feeding, household chores, laundry, cleaning, the whole 9 yards. And looking back on it, that should have been a time where I should have been going out and dating. I should have been out hanging out with my friends, being around my peers. But instead, I was in that role. It got to the point where my mom was secretly keeping me home from school. Dad didn't know that I was staying home as the caregiver for her. He found out about it. He got upset. And then he ended up getting a nurse to come in to take care of her during the day while I was at school. My father was at work. Once I got home from school, then that home health aide would then go home. So that's an example of the situation that I was in. And so I did some research online, did a search growing up fast as a kid, and found a couple of articles, and there's other articles there, and I will post a couple of links down below. And one article said, what does it mean to grow up fast? And it said that it's being thrust into adult situations and responsibilities at a young age can have a profound impact on one's development and behavior. People who had to grow up too fast often carry certain distinctive patterns of behavior into adulthood. Here are some unique behaviors often displayed by adults who had no choice but to grow up too fast. And these things really resonated with me, and so I share this, and perhaps some of these things I'm about to talk about may resonate with you. Maybe something you didn't think about. I didn't think about it until looking this stuff up, and didn't realize this was a thing for people. So what are some of these unique behaviors? Growing up too fast. We have to be strong, resulting in being disconnected from our needs, such as ignoring being tired, depressed, and so on. We become counter-dependent, where we emotionally act in an overly protective manner, and people can't get close to you, which leads to unsatisfying relationships. We believe we can't ask for help and have to do everything ourselves, leading us to be isolated, distrustful, alone in the world. It's hard for us to express our needs or even recognize we have needs. Believing that if you recognize the trauma or injustices you suffered, that you will be weak, flawed, a victim, and that's unacceptable to us. It blocks empathy for ourselves and the child you once were. Is this resonating? We feel empathy for the people who hurt us before feeling empathy for ourselves. which may lead us to relationships or social environments where you may be mistreated in the same way you were as a child. A common general effect of all this is poor self-care or self-harm. We can become workaholics, caring for everybody else, people-pleasing, self-esteem issues, or setting standards for ourselves that are too high or unrealistic, feeling stressed, anxious, lack of closeness in relationships. Growing up too fast, being mature beyond your years, oftentimes is seen as a positive thing, but can be a psychological prison the child put into by their caregivers, a role that doesn't belong to them. As a result, we develop devastating problems that we struggle with the rest of our lives. And I found a second article, and it talks about the 9 behaviors people have growing up too fast. People who grow up too fast carry 9 distinctive patterns in adulthood. See if these don't resonate with you. They sure as heck did with me. Number 1, they are not strangers to responsibility. Naturally take charge since it is what they are used to. Not wanting to be power hungry, but out of a sense of duty and a deep understanding of the consequences. They stay calm when things go south, facing adversity early, one has to develop resiliency to deal with it. Number 2, you may have heard this before. They have an old soul, wise beyond their years, experienced more than their peers. They are comfortable in their own company and prefer deep conversations over small talk. Their early experiences force them to see the world through a more mature lens, which often translates into them being perceived as an old soul. Number 3, yet they feel sometimes like an imposter. Even though they might be highly competent and often outperform their peers, these individuals can sometimes grapple with feelings of inadequacy or not being good enough. They may doubt their accomplishments and have persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. And why is that? Well, when children are thrust into adult roles prematurely, they might develop the belief that they must always exceed expectations to be worthy. This can lead to a constant pressure to perform and an inability to internalize success. So despite outward appearances of competence and confidence, internally, they might feel like they're just pretending to be an adult. Number 4, they often feel emotionally exhausted. Emotional exhaustion is more than just feeling tired. It's a state of feeling emotionally worn out and drained as a result of accumulated stress from your personal or work lives. People who were forced to grow up too fast often carry a higher emotional load than others. They might have been the ones managing family crises, taking care of siblings, or dealing with complex situations way beyond their years. As adults, they still might be the go-to person in their family or friend circle for any crisis, adding to their emotional burden. The constant state of being on high alert can lead to emotional exhaustion over time. Number 5, their independence is non-negotiable. Here are a few signs that your independence is a direct result of having to grow up too quickly. You prefer doing things on your own, even if help is available. You feel uncomfortable relying on others. You value your autonomy and guard it fiercely. You're highly self-reliant and self-motivated. These traits are not just about being independent. They are survival, resilience, and self-preservation. They're the marks of someone who's had to fend for themselves from an early age. Number 6, they struggle to let go. The author said, let's face it, letting go can be a struggle. Whether it's a relationship, a job, or a personal belief that no longer serves us, we tend to hold on tighter than most. And why? Well, when you've had to shoulder adult responsibilities early on, you learn to value stability and predictability. Change can be unsettling, even if it's not for the better. We might fear that letting go will lead to chaos or loss, feelings we're all too familiar with from our younger years. So if you find it hard to let go, even when your logical mind tells you it's the right thing to do, you're not alone. Number 7, they are always prepared for the worst. Imagine this. You're planning a road trip with friends. While they're excited about the fun and adventure, you're the one checking vehicle safety, planning alternate routes, and even packing a first aid kit. Sound familiar? People who had to grow up too fast often develop a knack for anticipating problems. They're always prepared for the worst case scenario. Why? Well, life taught them that things can go wrong unexpectedly. As children, they might not have had the luxury to be carefree and unprepared. Now, as adults, they carry this sense of vigilance with them. It's not that they're pessimistic, they're just realistic. Number 8, their boundaries are often blurred. The author said, I remember when I was a kid, I often found myself playing the role of a parent or counselor to my friends. I was always there to lend an ear, offer advice, or even handle their problems. At a time, it felt like I was just being a good friend. But as an adult, I realized that this habit had led to blurred boundaries in my relationships. You see, when you're forced into adult roles prematurely, you might end up overextending yourself to others. You might struggle to say no, even at the cost of your own well-being. This lack of boundary awareness isn't about being selfish or generous. It's a coping strategy from childhood that can carry over into adulthood. Which brings up a thought. I remember when I was in high school, and I remember in one of the classes, this girl sat behind me, and she asked me this question, and it stuck with me all these years. You know what she asked me? She said, Jim, why do you act like an adult? That took me off guard. Jim, why do you act like an adult? Number 9, the last one. They are resilient. Life threw you into the deep end at an early age, and you learned to swim rather than sink. You faced challenges that many your age didn't have to, and you came out stronger. This resilience is not about survival. It's about thriving in the face of adversity. It's about turning your trials into triumphs. This doesn't make the struggles you had to go through any less challenging or unfair, but it does speak volumes about your strength and tenacity. Yeah, man. Made me who I was. And I don't hold any ill will towards my parents. And I look back on it, and I realize they were doing the best that they could. And I know my father was under a lot of stress dealing with his wife with all her health issues and trying to make ends meet, and money was tight oftentimes. So it wasn't easy. And so I don't hold anything against them. And the last thing, are these traits holding you back? As we've explored, growing up too fast can lead to some distinctive behaviors in adulthood. Some of these behaviors might serve you well, while others might hold you back. Here are a few things to consider. Are your coping mechanisms helping or hindering you? Is your resilience turning into stubbornness? Are your boundaries healthy or too rigid? Growing up too fast is not a choice many of us had, but as adults, we do have a choice in how we let these experiences shape us. The key is to recognize these behaviors, understand their roots, and then make a conscious decision about how we want to live our lives moving forward. And I'll end it on this. Remember, it's not about erasing our past, but about learning from it and using it to become the best versions of ourselves. May your journey be one of resilience, growth, and self-discovery. Thanks for listening.